Hello, this is Pastor Frank Lewis, and welcome to another program in which I'm going to be talking to you today about a concept, an understanding of what happens when children absorb what happens in the family, what happens with their parents. It's called internalization. And this is called the power of internalization. It is very powerful. And it is very, very difficult to know what has actually been internalized because it's below conscious thought. So I'm going to be digging into that today. This is so very, very important because you as parents you first of all have internalized what your parents, how they raised you. And without emotional healing, additional emotional healing, you're going to raise your children just like you were raised. And so that is something that is going to be a problem because that's why dysfunction in families continues generation after generation. So we're going to look deeply into this concept and into getting an understanding of internalization. What is it? Why is it so powerful? How does it shape core beliefs? We're going to be looking at all of that. And so internalization is defined as the way a child, a young child, it's really interesting because developmental psychologists tell us that if you look at a baby has a clean slate. They don't have anything at all in their consciousness that is except for experiences. And they have these experiences. And they have to become an individual within 2.5 to 3 years. That's what the developmental psychologists tell us. Well, how does a baby, infant or a toddler become an individual in 2.5 to 3 years? Well, there's only one way: imitation, absorption, or this concept called internalization. It shapes core beliefs. It shapes who we are. What we absorb becomes who we are. And we're going to dig into that. And it really affects identity, emotional health, and behavior. So it is really a powerful force and one that needs to be understood by you parents so you can raise emotionally healthy children. And if you don't understand this and you continue without emotional healing, you're going to raise your children in dysfunction, because dysfunction is just something that happens in families because of generational after generation of dysfunction. And so there's generational cycles, and these generational cycles just keep going on. And I'm committed. I'm totally committed. That's why I do this and why I'm writing this book, is we need to stop these generational cycles. They are taking a toll on families, and dysfunction just continues generation after generation. And so we need to look at the definition. What is internalization? It is the process by which we absorb the emotional climate a child absorbs, the emotion. And when you were a child, the same thing happened. The emotional climate, behavior, words, and experiences around us, and they become parts of our inner world. In other words, without even knowing it, a child is imitating, a child is picking up, a child is absorbing, and whatever surrounds us long enough eventually becomes our identity. And see, identity that's the major force, that the major part of us that Satan's after. He wants to skew our identity so that we don't have a godly identity. We have an identity that has been perverted. And that's all he can do. But the beliefs that we have determines how we respond, how we react in relationships. And so understanding internalization helps us see why there's so much emotional pain in our world, and it helps us to understand why there must be emotional healing, and it must be intentional. So when we get more emotionally healed, we then are going to be uprooting the planting, if you will, of what came through internalization. And so I want to dig deeper into this, and we're going to talk on many different levels about internalization. But before I do, I want to tell you about my book. My book is called The Key. I wrote it, and you can get it on Amazon. And it is the key for understanding how to be healed emotionally. And so you want to get this book because it's going to help you get prepared to raise emotionally healthy children. I also have a YouTube channel. It's called and it's the @ Fortifying Families 4, Fortifying Families 4. And if you'll go there, you'll see 22 videos on marriage and about 12 or 13 videos on how to parent, how to raise emotionally healthy kids, and how to be a good parent. We're going to look into this, and we're going to start with another definition for internalization. It is the way the human mind, the heart, and the nervous system turn external experiences into internal beliefs, and it's done below conscious thought. So it's done at a subconscious level. Children don't even know what's happening to them, and parents don't know what's happening to their children when they raise them in dysfunction. It is who the children learn to become, who they are, what they deserve, how relationships work, how safe their world is, and how love is either given or withheld. So you can begin to get a sense of internalization is very, very powerful. The truth is the child does not even know it's happening. And they don't even know, even as they grow into an adult, that they have internalized what they were surrounded by and how they were raised. They internalize and absorb these following things: the tone of the home, the emotional availability of their parents. That's another way to say neglect, because they will internalize neglect. They internalize the things they see modeled by their parents. The words spoken to them, the way their parents handled conflict. How did your parents, whatever way you handle conflict with your spouse is the way your children are going to internalize handling conflict. The level of affection or neglect, the expectations placed on that you as parents place on your children will be internalized by them. And that'll keep them, trying to reach a bar that they can't reach for their entire adult life. And the trauma or tension that they experienced. So you can see this internalization is very, very important to understand what you're doing. And another reason why you've got to get emotionally healed. It's automatic. You can't filter it. You can't say, well, I want this part, but I don't want that part. A child can't do that. It's just automatic. They can't filter it, and they don't analyze it, and they can't determine this is good and this is not good. No, everything goes in. Everything goes in, and it's very, very subtle and you don't even know it's happening, as I said, and so it shapes core identity, and it shapes core belief. So over time, repeated experience become internal messages, beliefs. A child begins to view, and this is their truth about themselves and their world. So here's some examples. Growing up, if you were ignored, if your child is ignored growing up, they believe they don't matter. You can tell them they matter, but if they grow up ignored or neglected, they're going to believe they don't matter. If they grow up yelled at, they're going to believe they're a burden. There's something wrong with them. Growing up blamed, everything's my fault. You know, I'm responsible for everything that happens. Growing up criticized, I'm not good enough. And I deal with groups of people that are seeking emotional healing. And what happens is they grow up believing, most of the people I deal with believe they're not good enough. If they grow up with chaos, they must walk on eggshells. Or they actually create chaos on the other side. That's my wife. My wife, who's in heaven, as you know, she grew up in chaos, so she created chaos. In my family, and it was what she raised with and internalized. Growing up with unpredictable love means that love is unstable. And so beliefs are woven into the children's inner programming. And you can think of it like a computer. Well, it's programmed. Well, your child is programmed. Your child is being programmed by you and your spouse and how you are living out your lives raising your children. What they believe shapes how they react in relationships. So many adults react emotionally not in the present moment, okay? They react emotionally in the present moment, but it's really coming from the past because of what they internalized. And these reactions can be summarized like this: overreacting to conflict. How many of you I overreacted to conflict. How many of you are overreacting to conflict? You feel unsafe, even as there's in a calm environment. If that's the way you are, then that's the way you're going to create the internalization for your children. If you're numbing your emotions because your vulnerability was dangerous, then your children are going to be numbing their emotions. If you become defensive because you were criticized, it feels like rejection. If you're feeling responsible for others' feelings, that's going to be something that your children will feel. The truth is, these emotional patterns are not character flaws. They are simply the internalization of survival strategies. That's what we did to survive. That's what you as parents did to survive with your parents. And you see how this all goes on and on. So what a child repeatedly and consistently sees, hears, and experiences eventually becomes who they believe they are, becomes their core identity, becomes their identity. And so a child internalizes their worth and what their value is. They internalize their identity, who they believe they are. They internalize their lovability. Am I lovable? Based on how their parents are raising them. They internalize their capability. What can I do? They internalize their level of safety. Am I going to be hurt? Their value in relationships are internalized. So you see you're starting to get a picture of what children that you are raising internalize. Here's a few examples. A child raised by an angry parent believes that they must stay small and quiet. I know people that just gave up their voice because of an angry parent. And the child raised by a narcissistic parent believes that they must please others. That it's all about pleasing others because they had to please their narcissistic parent or parents. A child raised by a neglectful, emotionally unavailable parent, I'm on my own. I got to do it. They're not going to do it for me. I'm on my own. These internalized beliefs becomes core beliefs. They're the core part of the child. And that child then becomes adult with these same core beliefs. They're not going to be recognized by the child except by the acting out, except by how they're affected in relationships. Core beliefs will affect the child for a lifetime if they are not known, labeled, and dealt with and processed and healed. So what a child absorbs is how they receive or give love. How a child absorbs the love a parent gives them or the lack of it is going to be how the children give and receive. So you parents are the first ones that model love to your child. So even dysfunctional love gets internalized as normal. That's what happens. And adults who internalize unhealthy love often, in other words, if a child internalizes unhealthy love, then when they become an adult, they will choose partners. Oh, I've seen this happen so many times. They choose partners who match their wounded parents. Oh, that's so predictable. If I can know how a child was raised, I'll know basically how they're going to choose their mate. It's just very predictable. They'll mistake chaos for passion. They'll confuse emotional distance for safety. They'll accept disrespect because it feels familiar. You can't believe the number of women in my groups that have been disrespected and it feels normal. So they don't even realize that they're being disrespected. They'll reject healthy love because it feels foreign. And they'll become either very, very clingy in their relationships, or they'll be an avoidant. They'll avoid relationships. And I have people that I work with that are avoidants. How we relate will be directly affected by what we absorbed as children and is the main reason why relationships are so difficult, is because we attract the people that are most like our parents. That's what we're going to be attracted to. And internalization determines how you as parents will raise your children. Without emotional healing, as I've said a number of times, because I want to drive that home, is that you will parent just like you were parented. And so you need to know that what you absorbed is going to be how you're going to parent. What you internalized is going to be how you parent. I know, in my case, I internalized anger. My father was very angry. I told you he was a rageaholic. He was a doctor, and he was very abusive. So I became, without even knowing it, very angry. Now, I raised my children a little bit differently than my father because I was narcissistically wounded, but I did not, thank God, become a narcissist. So I raised them, but I raised them too hard-handed, too heavy-handed. And so it's affected them. And, I didn't know any better. I just did what my parents did, but I didn't do it quite to the effect my dad did. You will cause your children to be raised in a way that you may overreact when you've internalized fear. So you as a parent may overreact when you internalize fear. Underreact because you internalize numbness or emotional distance. become controlling because you internalized unpredictability. That's what I did. That's what I did. Become overly permissive because you internalize shame. And you repeat the same phrases your parents used, okay? So you repeat to your children the same phrases your parents used. You struggle with affection because it was not given to you growing up. So internalization is so powerful and influences not only your life, but the life of your children because of how you raise them. Now, internalized trauma will stay with you for a lifetime. Internalized trauma is just that's what happened to me. I internalized trauma. And as I grew up, I was anxious, I was hypervigilant, I had muscle tension, I had digestive issues. I panicked sometimes. I was not emotionally numb except when I hated my father, so I was actually emotionally numb. I was worn out a lot of the time, so I had a lot of fatigue. And I don't recall whether I had brain fog. I was just low-level depression all the time. So that's what's going to happen to you if you don't get the emotional healing. And a child grows up to be an adult and has all these symptoms. I had all those symptoms. I grew up with all those symptoms. You're going to grow up with all those symptoms. You're going to pass them on to your children. And so that's going to be a problem for sure. Once I got enough healing, I didn't have the symptoms anymore. And that was a great day in my life. I wasn't hypervigilant. I'm not hypervigilant now. So that was a great day. My body was free from a lot of these symptoms, most all of them. And so that was a very good time, a very good result, excuse me. Behavior scientists tell us that until internalized traumatic memories are processed and healed, that you will continue to respond as if the past is still happening in the present. And that is something that you've got to be very aware of. Now, how does internalization affect your children? Your children naturally internalize the character of you and your spouse, and how does that affect their relationship with God? That's the next question. If a parent was distant, then God is distant. If a parent was unpredictable, then God is unsafe. That's what happened to me. That's what happened to me. If a parent was angry, then God's angry. That's also what happened to me. If love was conditional, then God's love feels conditional. We just take and put on God what we internalized from our parents. And so I had a horrible time trusting God. And the reason is because I believed that God was punishing. My dad was punishing, so I believed God was punishing. My dad was unpredictable, so I believed that God was unpredictable. And the truth is that without emotional healing, your children internalize you and how you are, and they're going to look at God the same way. So really what's happening when you get at that emotional healing, or when you make a commitment to do it, is you are actually having a transformation in the spiritual side too, because everything a child absorbs becomes a blueprint for their beliefs in God and their emotions and their relationships and their self-worth. Internalization actually explains why wounds run so deep. Why dysfunctional patterns actually go generation after generation. Why you struggle with self-worth or intimacy. I struggled with self-worth and intimacy. Why emotional literacy, you can't change. See, because you've internalized it, it's below conscious thought, you can't change it by willpower. You can't just say, well, that's what I'm going to do. So really, what I hope you've seen today is that internalization, why it's so powerful. Why is internalization or absorption? Think of it like a child, a baby, an infant, a toddler. A small child is like a sponge. It just picks up the child picks up everything in the environment. Everything, like a sponge picks up water on a sink, the child picks up everything they experience. And it becomes, like I said, once it's internalized, it becomes how they react in relationships, what they believe about themselves. And so if you don't get emotional healing, then you're going to raise children that are dysfunctional. Just 1 + 1 = 2. That's the way it works. And so I hope you're more convinced than ever that you are going to be committed to getting emotionally healed so you can raise more emotionally healthy children. Because when you do this, you're going to be taking responsibility and doing your part to stop the generational dysfunction that occurred to you from your parents and all the way back to Adam and Eve. See, it really started in the garden. What happened is Eve chose man's way of doing things, not God's way, man's way. And so Adam and Eve had a dysfunctional relationship. Their children had a dysfunctional relationship, and it's come all the way to you and your spouse. And so doesn't it sound like something you want to do, which is to stop the madness, stop the dysfunction, stop having an ongoing dysfunctional children that choose dysfunctional mates, that raise dysfunctional children? We got to stop the madness. And that's why I'm doing this. I want you to raise emotionally healthy children. Because it's your responsibility. God, you decided to have children. And so it's your responsibility to raise the children in the best way you can. And the best way you can is to actually go ahead and make sure that you get emotionally healed before you start having children. That's the best way to do it. And when you do that, you're going to have children that will thank you for the rest of their lives because they will have the best life they could possibly have.